Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. Clock on the wall says it's 11 o'clock. So we've got time to really go home. Hope everybody changed your clock. It's last night. Glad you're here today. Thank you for our visitors being with us. We're on page 11 of the book. The topic of being lonely. Loneliness is where we are. We'll begin with a word of prayer. John Paul, would you lead some prayer, please? Well, the definition of being lonely is the feeling of being isolated, invisible, insignificant. All those fall into the category of how people feel when they are lonely. And back when the lockdown happened during COVID, that feeling of loneliness really began to show up in people as never before, because we were cut off from family, we were cut off from friends. We got cut off from work. We got cut off from social activities. And people really began to understand what being lonely was about. Because being with people is the best antidote to avoid loneliness, being around people. Doesn't mean you got to be around somebody all the time, but we have been created to be social beings, to be around one another. And COVID really brought that about, that how we need that. And could it happen again? We hope not. But then again, it'd be something that we might consider, how do I avoid being lonely so that such a thing happens? Since COVID happened, 50% of Americans said they experienced loneliness. Now that they know what loneliness is. Beforehand, there wasn't really a problem there. We could go see family or friends or go back and forth to work or whatever, but then that showed us that all those things can suddenly become abruptly stopped, and people became lonely. Now, we all certainly need our alone time. Even Jesus had his time to be alone. He needed to be alone. But again, Jesus wanted to be around people. He was around those 12 disciples every day for 3 years, and around other individuals. But we got to have, our alone time at times. But yet remember, we live in a community, and we are social beings. And people are happier, and they are healthier when we have contact with other people. Happier, healthier. Some people say I'd rather be around my pet than another human. Well, that may go on okay for a while, but pets cannot communicate. They can't talk with you and have a conversation with you as a human can. And I understand sometimes people get fed up with the way people treat one another, and they like their pets, but again, we need to be around each other. Adam had all the animals in the world around him. He named them, but yet God saw fit to give him a helpmate, a wife, because he understood the communication that needed to be there between Adam and Eve at the time. But we are becoming less and less connected in our society. Time over the years, that what we spend around people has decreased. And that's all because of the social media and because of the internet. Things are being done over that now. In 2003, a person spent 60 minutes a day in face-to-face engagement. Not that you just were around somebody, but you were talking directly with somebody for 60 minutes a day in 2003. In 2020, that decreased to 20 minutes a day. So again, the social media has taken the place of this one-on-one conversation that one time we had. In 2021, the average person said they had only 3 friends that they would put their confidence in, but won't be willing to talk to somebody about certain specific things, confidential things. And the less friends one has, the more loneliness is a possibility there. In 1999, 70% of Americans belong to some sort of religious group. In 2021, only 47%. So again, that's why you see religion is dropping in America. People don't want to be around each other. And again, that's a time of coming together and being with each other. So the more people want this loneliness, I don't want to be around people, I mean, that means they'll be pulling away from God as well and have less of a response to God. Lonely people have more of a negative, loneliness, I should say, has a negative effect on person's health. They say that loneliness is worse than smoking or alcohol or obesity or even air pollution. All those things have an effect on the people, but loneliness, I said, affects a person the most. So we don't like to be lonely. We don't like that. But yes, it's a part of life, and sometimes we need to learn how to overcome it. Question 1 in the book, what fact did God observe in the very beginning? Genesis 2:18. And the Lord said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. So even God knew that it wasn't good for Adam to be alone, even though he had all the animals around him. But he understood that how he created Adam, so he gave him a wife, or he gave him Eve. And God understood it. Question 2, what are some of the things that cause us to be alone? Genesis 35, 19 through 20, or 21 there. Here it says, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Probably the most major cause of loneliness is the death of a spouse. That's not a loneliness that we want, but we know that it's a part of life and that it's going to happen. One of the mates are going to go first. So are we to dwell on it and just get all bent out of shape? No. But understand that it's going to happen one day. And we need to sort of try to think, how am I going to handle this when it happens? Some folks push it back, don't even want to think about it, and when it happens, it's very difficult to try to adapt their life to. But it's just a part of life. We find it in the scriptures here. Jacob lost his wife. He became a lonely person. They say that women can handle loneliness better than men, that men have a greater need to be around somebody other than a woman. So probably a lot of truth to that. So death, that's a major contributor to loneliness. B, Leviticus 13:46. He shall be unclean all the days. He has the sword. He shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Of course, this is pertaining to leprosy. A person who had leprosy, they had to quarantine themselves pretty much all their life. Couldn't be around individuals. Now, if they did come out in public, and at times they did, they had to be yelling at the top of their voice, I'm a leper, I'm a leper. And I guarantee you, the people, when they heard that, they began looking, searching, where is he or she at? And they parted ways, let them have the right of way. But there's pretty much a quarantine there that they had to go through, isolation, and that couldn't be a healthy situation. I mean, isolated from your own family. You were probably with other lepers. I know, I guess they still have these leper colonies in some of these third world countries. I'm not sure about how the curing goes, that they have medications such as that to cure leprosy now. But at one time, there's still these leper colonies. They're isolated from other people. So it may be some kind of a disease that would cause one to have isolation. C, Jeremiah 15:17. I did not sit in the assembly of the mockers, nor did I rejoice. I sat alone because of your hand. for you have filled me with indignation. Jeremiah here is speaking about not associating with those who had a disrespect for the Word of God. There may be those that you just will have to say, because of your view of God, I'm just going to have to back away from you. And you may have to isolate yourself from that type of individual, because who wants to be around somebody who is using the name of God's name in vain, who is doing certain things to bring harm to the Lord's way? And we don't want to be around that. So it may be we have to isolate ourselves from somebody like that, because they very well could have a negative influence on us. You may have to have some isolation from such an individual. And that's what Jeremiah is talking about here. I'm not going to be in the assembly of those who mock God. I'm not going to do it. D, 1 Thessalonians 2:1. For you yourselves know, brethren, that our coming to you was not in vain. Paul here was talking about maybe isolating yourself from somebody who has no desire to know God, to understand God. And not that you ever just give up on this individual. But Paul says here, I tried and tried and tried, but I may have to isolate myself from you, and because of what is taking place there, what he did try to help them, but it was all maybe in vain, what they were doing. So it's not a loneliness here. It's not sometimes it's something that just comes about in life. But we have to separate ourselves from. Number 3, what constructive ways can we use being alone? Matthew 14:23. When he had set the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there. Prayer is going to do better when we are in a place of solitude. Christ talks about prayer. Where should we go to pray? As far as cut out the outside, he says go to the closet and pray. A place of solitude, a place where not all the distractions are. So Christ, when he was alone, he prayed. A good time for all of us to learn from what he went through, to be alone, to pray. We sort of got to disconnect from the world. A lot of things going on around us. Got to cut the phone off. Try to get somewhere where the TV's off. Just try to a quiet place and pray. Christ did, and it would be good. That's an advantage of being by yourself. Then we have B, Philippians 4 and verse 8. Finally, brethren, he goes through all these things that are good, things that are true, noble, just, pure, lovely, good report. Meditate on these things. There's a difference in praying and meditating. Sometimes we just need to think. Just think about things. And again, being by ourselves gives us an opportunity to think about life, to think about our future, where it's going to be. Again, we have a lot of distractions that can come through on things, but we need to think about it. Think about life. And then C, 2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman needed not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. When you're by yourself, why not study? Why not do some studying? Again, got to get rid of the distractions. Need to read them and get rid of those distractions. Block them out. Loneliness helps in study. And then D, 2 Timothy 4:2, preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. Maybe use your alone time, your lonely time, to make preparation, to be prepared, to have an answer. How am I going to answer that? Try to think about the question, what it would be. How can I go about answering? Again, that's going to work a lot better when you have time to yourself to discuss things with yourself. So there are some ways that being alone can be constructive. Number 4, what good came out of one man's loneliness? 2 verses here, Psalms 102 and verse 7. I lie awake, I am like a sparrow alone on the housetop. And then verse 1, a prayer of the afflicted when he is overwhelmed and pours out his complaint before the Lord. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come to you. Here's a person who is afflicted by something. Something has afflicted him. Something has caused him to think, okay, I know my days are going to be shorter because of what's happened. I look out there and I see an end. And this is causing this person to think. And in verse 7, the sparrow is used. And the sparrow is a bird that has a very short lifetime, about 2 years. If they're fortunate, they make it through the wintertime and other problems that they have in their bird life. So he uses a sparrow here alone on the housetop. How many times have we ever seen the sparrow on the power line by himself? Not like a group of them, doves that line the power line, but a sparrow generally is there by himself. And sometimes we may feel like that sparrow, thinking about life, how much life we have had previously. We have, I say previous years, and how much more do we have? And it gives us time to think about life. And that's what the psalmist here was doing. He lay awake at night thinking about this, caused him to think. And again, he made his request to God to help him during those times, help him to observe and make the most of the shortness of his life. Question 5, are we ever really alone? In John 8, verse 16. And yet, if I do judge, my judgment is true, for I am not alone, but I am with the Father who sent me. And we know this as Christians. We know it. We're never alone. God is with us, and when we have to make judgment calls, understand that God is there with us as well. When we are making calls based upon His Word, making judgment calls, we've got to make judgment calls from time to time. He's going to back us by the Word, and sometimes when you guys speak the truth, it can be a very lonely place, very lonely. If you're in a group, we'll say, and you're one that's standing for truth, it can be a lonely place when you speak truth, and nobody agrees with you. Or it may be a family situation that you're in, and you got to speak the truth. Here's what the truth is. It can be a lonely situation there. But again, as long as we are letting the Word do the speaking for us, then we should go well. We know that we are not alone in God's presence. We're there with Him. Question 6. How did one Christian avoid loneliness? Acts chapter 9, this is speaking about Tabitha, or her other name, Dorcas. And at Joppa, there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did. Now she was a widow. And you find what she was doing was good works. And people appreciated her good works. And she was always looking for someone or some way to help somebody. And that certainly helped to take care of that loneliness that came in her situation, finding something to do. And whenever death does occur in the life of individuals, especially maybe individuals who are retired and don't have a regular job to go to daily, how good it would be if they find something to take a part of their time with. Do something with their time. And I know one lady, she became a widow, and what was she going to do with her time? I know her and the preacher where she attended, well, they door knocked every house in their little community or city where they lived. It took them a while, but she got involved in doing good things. And that certainly took her thought off what she had just gone through and just made it better. So there's plenty there to do, and we just won't do it. Question 7, what is a great danger in loneliness? 2 Samuel chapter 11, we've heard the expression, idleness is the devil's workshop. Well, this is talking here about David, when he should have been out with his army fighting, but instead he was on the rooftop. And then what happens? Well, there's Bathsheba. Temptation took over. But if he'd been busy, again, he could take care of the sin in the right way, or that temptation in the right way. He could taken care of it. But sometimes when we're by ourselves, the old devil, he can get after us. But some thoughts in our head that shouldn't be there. We don't want there. And David should have been busy this time. Question 8, what is the best remedy for loneliness? 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Staying busy is good, but staying busy in the Lord's work is even better. Either way, you want to stay busy. But with the Lord's work, it'll never be in vain what you do. Never be in vain doing as the Lord requests. Question 9. Did Christ promise not to leave us alone? I'll use Matthew 28, verse 20, instead of John 16. Here Christ says, teach them to observe all things I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. It will take a lot of faith to understand that Christ is with us all the way to the end. A lot of faith to have our faith as we should have it. We are not alone, and He is with us. He knows when we are lonely. He knows that, and He knows how it can be difficult at times in order to pull through it. Then at the bottom, some of the questions down there list some constructive things you can do to avoid loneliness. Well, make the choice to be around people. Make that choice. Stay off the social media. That's not going to help loneliness. Be around people. Communicating with people is going to be the best way. 2, what can you do for others to help them overcome their loneliness? Be their friend. Be a true friend. And when they tell you something in confidence, you do not spread it. You don't do that. Be a friend. And get involved in their life. It's going to take some of your time to do that, but be a friend to them. Then number 3, is there a difference between being lonely and wanting to be alone? There's a big difference. Again, we all need our quiet time, certainly. But there's a difference in being lonely and wanting to be alone. You can be in a room full of people and still be lonely. And that's hard to believe, but you can be. But again, you got to have somebody in that group. If you're going to be among the people, somebody you can connect to, talk with, have a relationship with, something like that. It's going to be good. But sometimes when people want to be alone, let them be alone. Don't just go in and barge in on them. If they say, I want to be alone, honor that. Honor it. And don't barge in on them. The time will come when maybe you can do something to help them in their loneliness, but honor their request. That's what they want. Honor it. Anything on loneliness? All right, we'll take up next week on the next lesson. Thank you for your attention.